Hey everyone, welcome to episode 35 of the MiamiTech Pod. I'm Cesar and I'm joined here by Brian this week. Maria and Will are off, but we have a special set of guests today on the podcast. Michael Martocci and Helen Rankin from SwagUp are with us. Michael and Helen, welcome to the MiamiTech Pod.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Our first podcast together.
Yeah,
this might be a good idea or a bad idea. No, we'll determine after.
So the rule here is like what basically as one person talks, the other is going to fact check right after, right? Like that's how we're going to do this.
Yeah, Helen keeps me grounded, I'd say.
Good.
Someone has to keep them humble, you know.
Awesome. So Michael, why don't you start by giving us a sense of, your journey in entrepreneurship, how you got the idea for SwagUp, and we'll start there, and then we'll kick it over to Helen for the same.
Try to keep it as concise as possible, but I was like a natural born entrepreneur. Like ever since I'm 4 or 5 years old, there's a picture. I put it on my Facebook, and Helen even got a tape with my picture on it. But it was basically me as like a 4 or 5 year old outside my house. I'm like on the phone. I have no shirt on. I'm selling like yogurts and lemonades and stuff at this stand outside my house. And I used to do stuff like that all the time. I used to package up the tissues in my house and turn them into like little to-go packets and try to sell them to people at my house for dinner. And I just loved making money. And I don't even, I couldn't even do anything with the money at 5 years old, but there's just something about like transacting and selling that's like really appealing. And even when I played video games, it was like the Lemonade Tycoons and, Roller Coaster Tycoons, like anything commercial. I was always into those
Roller Coaster Tycoon. That was the fucking game. I played that for hours and hours and hours.
Exactly. It was so fun. I loved it. And just seeing like building something from scratch. You start with like this blank field and you start building the roller coasters and the attractions, and you make the investment to get, this restaurant there, and you start to see it grow. Like, I just loved all of that, kind of just everything that went into it. It was just naturally like inclined to, there's something in my brain that just enjoys it. And, so that continued into stuff like baseball cards, very Gary Vaynerchuk style, buying and selling baseball cards. I used to set up a little stand outside of the bus stop when I'd get home. So when all the kids would come off the bus, they'd see my little stand of baseball cards and try to sell them to them. And so I was always looking for ways to make money. There was even, my dad is like in the travel, like sports travel and entertainment and stuff. And he used to put these Giants events on where at the end of the season, he called them like recap breakfasts. And it was like, they'd honor the player of the year and all this kind of stuff. And I used to run the merchandise stand there, and I would go online and get autographs from all the players. And then I'd go back to the merchandise stand and sell the ball for like $600 because I was like, all these people were waiting in line for like 2 hours to get all the autographs. And I just skipped the line. I was like, hey, you don't have to wait in these 2 hour lines. Here's a ball. Just give me $600. So I just love that kind of stuff. So I ended up going to school. I got really into finance because my mom's boyfriend was a wealth manager. And I ended up going to William & Mary for finance. I bought my first stock when I was 13. I got really into that, and I thought, I wanted to be a wealth manager at the time, just by looking at what he had done. And my mom was at Morgan Stanley for 32 years. I ended up working at a hedge fund when I was 18 as an intern. And so I kind of diverted my focus away from entrepreneurship for a little bit. And then a buddy of mine, came to me from high school while I was in college. He's like, hey, let's start this app on campus to find other people that want to do similar activities. So, you want to get a volleyball game together, you put it out in the app, you find other people in the area, you start a group chat, you meet up at this location, that kind of stuff. And in that process, we wanted to get custom flags and different merchandise to promote it around campus. And that's how I got introduced to, that industry and that supply chain and like how to find these items. Because, the custom flag manufacturers in the US want like $140. And I found a supplier on Alibaba overseas for like $8. I was like, okay, we have this app, but why don't we start like a little custom printing website at the same time, reselling these flags that we were purchasing for the app. So that's how I learned about it. I ended up dropping out of school because that kind of reignited, the entrepreneurial bug, I think. And I got disinterested in finance after that. And then I joined forces with an NFL player for a year, and we started a fitness training business. And then I went to a VC fund for like 3 months. And then while I was around these startups every day, and with that, branded merchandise kind of supply chain in the back of my mind, I just put two and two together, and I was like, the fast growth companies of the world love branded merchandise, and there's just no go-to company is like the brand that they can associate themselves with. That's like, this is where all the best companies get their branded merchandise, and this is the company that makes it super simple from end to end. So that was like the original, thesis and insight for SwagUp that then, bubbled into something much bigger over time.
And we'll get to that, but Helen, I'd love to hear your journey. I mean, were you flipping baseball cards and lemonade stands and all of that in your early days, or what's your story?
I was not flipping baseball cards, but it's a little bit of a different journey. I was raised by a single mom. My mom came here from Mexico, and I had a very different experience growing up with just seeing my mom really growing everything herself and doing everything herself. And that for me was like my motivation. I felt like I had no excuse to fail. My mom came here with nothing, didn't speak English, like has 4 kids. So that was kind of always my inspiration. And she was very entrepreneurial. Like she was always doing things and trying to make money. And she ended up buying properties and investing in properties. And when her and my father were together, interesting enough, he started his own company. They started their own company together. And part of their marketing campaign was actually making swag packs. So my childhood was like putting baskets along the line, putting little snacks in them, and putting cards and figuring out, okay, these are the client lists that my dad and my mom want to target. And we would drop them off. So that was kind of an interesting growing up of how my parents were. They were very hands-on. I saw them build their own businesses. Once my parents divorced, my mom was kind of on her own and doing the same thing. And both parents were very entrepreneurial. So that was something that I kind of was always motivated by and always kind of wanting to learn and work. As I kind of got older and we moved to Miami, that's where I started to kind of learn a little bit more about marketing and tech. And I was obsessed. I was so interested in all of it and learning about SEO and SEM and affiliate marketing. So what I actually did at that time, a lot of companies didn't have a website, or they didn't have a marketing strategy. They didn't know what the internet was going to be. So I started to call every business that was in the yellow pages and tell them, hey, I'll start your Google ad campaigns, build your website for you. And if you get a lead from it, then you'll pay me. And it was such an easy thing to do, because also at the time, Google was trying to get more people to use their ads. And they were giving like $500 towards, ad spend if you opened a new account. So I would just do that for all of these businesses. And like, well, I don't have anything to lose. Google's giving me $500. I'm setting up their ad campaigns, and then they're paying me if they get a sale out of it. So that's kind of when I started to want to learn more about marketing. And I started working in tech company in South Florida. And that's kind of how my career kind of evolved, with wanting to be more in tech and entrepreneurship. I always knew I wanted to start a business. I felt like I wanted to learn so much. I didn't go to college. I went to college, but ended up dropping out. I couldn't afford it. I was kind of paying for everything myself. So everything I did was very much, I have to learn and self-start and figure out where I want to be and what company I want to start at some point. But while I was on my startup journey, the entire time I pretty much just would poach and would remember to keep relationships with every person that I thought, you're going to work for me one day. And they would be like, yeah, okay, Helen, that's cute. Now half of them are working for us at SwagUp. So I've kind of like used those years that was like being at a startup was my college. I've used those years to kind of identify talent that I wanted to have work for me one day, or have as part of our team. and really just like learn and grasp and be able to absorb as much knowledge as possible. So,
you know, as
Definitely
someone
one of
who,
the downsides of never working at a company is I don't have people to coach.
you know, as someone who works at a university, you know, I can tell you that you've learned way more practical and tactical, useful stuff in your, like in both of your journeys, you know, than you ever would have learned in a classroom where they taught you about the theories of all this stuff. You know, understanding like customer outreach and customer development, all that stuff. You guys learned that like the best way. You know, you wouldn't have learned any of those processes or procedures, you know, with, you know, in a lecture hall somewhere. So,
well, they weren't teaching it either. I mean, at the time it was like, I loved marketing and tech, and it was, you know, very basic ad agency type style. Like they didn't even know what Google ads were or how to teach SEO or how to optimize for any of that stuff. So it was like, I was trying to learn something that the schools weren't even teaching. So
yeah. In 2021, they're still not teaching that. So
no.
Yeah,
so you're
I
still
always
ahead.
said education needs to be tied to context. You know, like you can learn information in an educational setting, but if you don't have the real world context of like how that actually applies, it's very hard to be able to use that information in a way that's practical. Whereas if, you know, I could read a book while I'm in college, and that book means so much different to me today when I can actually see it in real life being applicable, and I can connect the dots. So it's all about the context. Plus, I always said if I were to go back to school, I don't think school is like a waste of time or anything like that, especially for entrepreneurs. But what I think is very valuable is liberal arts education, and I don't think most people would say that, especially in a business context. Because when I was going to school, I was like, shit, I don't want to go to William & Mary because it's a liberal arts school. Like I just want to go to the business school and get this over with. So I'd rather have gone to like Georgetown, for example, where you go straight into the business school. But I have a big appreciation for, you know, polymathic thinking and liberal arts thinking, because you get this, you know, you get a broad scope of knowledge that you can apply into, you know, new realms that you wouldn't, you know, I think a lot of people get myopically focused on specific knowledge for what they're specifically doing. Then they miss kind of the cross-functional learnings from other industries or other disciplines. Like if I were to go back to school, I would probably have studied like psychology and sociology, not business or marketing or entrepreneurship or anything like that.
Yeah, we had Michael Saman on the podcast a while ago, and he was talking about his experiences, you know, being the youngest engineer at Facebook, and part of it was really interesting because he would just have these moments where he his words, not ours, right? He was very naive, and he would just walk into meetings and say like, you know, hey, Mark Zuckerberg, why aren't you thinking about Snapchat? They're a real competitor. Like you need to do something about this. And like half of the time they're like, great, now you're in charge. You're the PM for youth, right? Like go do it. And, you know, I think there's some of that too, that like when you have no context for like the textbook of, you know, like the playbook for business, right? Or like, you know, the entire, you know, career of an entrepreneur over 20 years and or the things that some type of like business school instructor is actually teaching you is the right way of doing it. You kind of like chart your own path, and sometimes you're more creative and get to, you know, like identify shortcuts and get to the answer faster than if you were to like actually try to follow someone's opinion of the right way to do it. I don't know. It's my take.
And you understand things at first principles when you learn them yourself. You know, you understand like why that actually is the case versus just like absorbing knowledge, you know, and not really being able to connect the dots. Like you need to understand like why is this even the right way to do it? Because when you understand things at first principles, you can, you know, re-engineer like new opinions about it or new ways of doing things.
I also think there's just like something really awesome about not knowing anything, like about something. Yeah. I always say like my biggest superpower is that I'm very naive about things, and I just like, I don't really understand the risk and I just do it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of like that, where they're like, everyone's telling you, no, don't do this. And we're the expert. We've been in this industry for so long. You should have never, you can't do this. And it's like, well, I don't really know any better, so I'm just going to do it anyway. And that's always kind of like worked out.
Yeah. So let's talk about SwagUp, right? You know, when was the company started, Michael?
So technically I started experimenting with the idea in like February of 2017. I was at that VC fund from like, I can't remember the exact dates, but maybe January till April, something like that. And technically started SwagUp May 23rd of 2017. And I actually met Helen like May 26th of 2017, like 3 days later or something.
Yeah.
And for those that are like unaware of this, this is like, Miami's new power couple, Michael and Helen. Helen's the chief strategy officer
There's
of
literally
SwagUp.
just a door behind me, and then she's in the other room. So
Exactly. There
might
you
look
go.
like we're in different places, but we're not.
And we'll get to your journey building a company together, but also being in a relationship, because I think that's super interesting. And there's some people that have like these like wild opposition against that, and they're like, no, that's not appropriate. And I want to unpack that. But for the listeners that have been under a rock and not super familiar, like walk us through SwagUp, the product, the offering, all of those things, and we can we'll go from there.
I think there's still a lot of people that don't know that we exist because, for the longest time, we were very much under the radar, especially the first 3 years, because it was just about building a business and focusing on customers. And only more recently over the last year and a half, did we start to like, get the megaphone out and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. But, at the end of the day, what we basically do is help companies, from end to end, create, distribute, manage their inventory of branded merchandise. So in the past, companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Netflix, whatever, these high growth companies, they use swag for so many different reasons. So they use it for new employee onboarding, employee engagement, celebrating milestones, welcoming new customers, events, all this kind of stuff. And, it's all happening in a really fragmented logistical process. So you might have 30 different teams using swag for different reasons, doing it in 30 different ways with 30 different vendors. And what we do is help these companies consolidate that process to one vendor and manage the process from end to end. So curate the world of hundreds of thousands of products into just the products that are actually high quality from the best vendors possible, handling the design process, handling the actual production and quality checking and assembly if they're doing some sort of kits or packed, and then handling the ongoing inventory management and distribution, whether it's in the US or globally. Then we also have technology and APIs to integrate into their systems to help them use swag at scale to automatically fulfill for every time somebody gets hired or every time a customer drops out of the funnel or anything like that. So really just eliminating the friction that historically existed in the process of creating and sending out branded merchandise for these companies at scale.
That's really interesting to me because like part of the secret sauce of what you guys have done is the curation aspect, right? Because I've ordered swag for different companies that I've run and organizations I've been part of, and like it's hit or miss, right? You could get absolute trash, like t-shirts that disintegrate upon the first wash, or pens that have no ink in them or whatever it is, right? And so it's interesting, like that alone is enough value to like start a business, is like being like we produce the best stuff, right? Like we make sure you get the best stuff. But it's really interesting that you guys have sort of seen like the rest of the opportunity and the business model of like, I would guess that you guys have super high retention rates amongst your customers, right? There's very little churn.
Yeah, about 70% of our revenue on a monthly basis comes from existing customers. So they're making the majority of our revenue.
Yeah, I suspected as much. I had no idea what the percentage was, like how often, but it's really interesting to think about. Like, you guys are also like completely separating yourselves from the price sensitive crowd that are like going to for imprint or Vistaprint or whatever print.com thing, right? And buying like the cheapest face masks they can find for 10 cents a piece, right? Like
price is so rarely part of the conversation with the types of customers that come to us. They're much more thoughtful about this. They value their time a ton.
Mm-hmm.
They value quality and the outcomes much more than like trying to optimize or drive down costs. And that's what we saw. It's like, yeah, it's a crowded market. There's 30,000 other swag distributors in the US alone, but it's super fragmented and they all do the same thing. Nobody's standing out and differentiating in any sort of way that makes it like really like, wow, this company's doing something different. So we always were looking for like, What are the ways that makes us remarkable? And you're totally right about curation. Like that was the original insight. It was just like, if we can make this more curated and simplified and reduce the decision fatigue, kind of the paradox of choice, that was all we were trying to do at the very, very beginning. It evolved into much more over time.
And what did it involve too, right? Like how have you seen the iteration and kind of like, from products to how you're thinking about the business and all of that? I just from studying and watching what you guys are doing, I mean, I've seen you've hit this enormous scale. I mean, Helen, do you want to talk a little bit about that iteration over the years?
Yeah, so as Michael mentioned, initially it was just, let's just give people really good products and swag that they're going to be happy about, and just, if we're not going to wear it, let's not sell it. Like that was kind of like our model. Yeah, the SwagUp notebook, I love that one. And it started with that, and then it's kind of evolved to it's kind of evolved more to swag being somewhat of the least interesting part of our business. Like swag gets people in the door, but it's really everything else that we offer to make it easy for customers to manage it, to ship it out globally, to be able to curate them into packs, to be able to have a lot of customization, to utilize it for shops, for any experience that customers want. Our system makes it really flexible for them to do that. So it's really evolved into more of a logistics and fulfillment, and being able to manage it all into one platform, where I don't think initially that's even where we were thinking. It was really just, let's just like give people good swag and like make it easy for them.
That's why I'm such an advocate for just starting things. Everybody gets so caught up on like their idea, or how their idea is going to be so much better or different than somebody else's. And really all that matters is like understanding pain points for customers and reacting to them, quickly.
Yeah.
So, it started with, okay, our startups looking for a more curated, better swag experience? Yeah, they are. But then it's like, okay, as you work with these companies over time, you hear the same stories over and over again about the pain points, where it's really difficult for them to manage manually. And then you just react to it. You just start solving those problems one by one. Like we think of it as like, this process historically is very full of friction. Like let's say you're trying to go from point A to point B, like to get the job done. It's like this. And we're trying to like smooth out that line by anytime there's friction in that process, let's eliminate it, let's automate it, let's do the work for them, let's give them technology that solves that problem. Like even let's say you're placing an order for, it's the holidays and you're Facebook, and you want to send 10,000 packages out to all of your teams to say, thank you for all you did over 2021. We're super excited for 2022, happy holidays or something. That process to get that into those people's hands historically would be full of lots of manual back and forth. It would be, you'd have to coordinate across multiple parties, get a 3PL involved. How do you collect the addresses and send it out? We make it really companies collect and like distribute to thousands of people within one checkout flow on a site. So to Helen's point, it's very much, it's the products, but it's also the whole coordination logistics layer on top of it.
And a lot of companies that we work with, they didn't even do swag before because it was so challenging. Mm-hmm. Like they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known about you like years ago. Like, I can't even believe I was doing this myself. And I think the pandemic kind of forced people to find alternate solutions. Before, people had an office where they're like getting all their interns and assembling swag packs and stuff together, and they couldn't do that. And now they realize, wow, there's an easier way to be able to send swag and curate it. And we've really been always super customer centric. We started with offering the good swag, and then someone wanted a box. They asked us to pack it, and then we started offering that, and then they wanted warehousing, and then they wanted a platform. So it's kind of continuously evolved based off of the customers and what they want and what they're looking for to make it easy.
It's interesting. I think COVID probably helped you guys to some extent, in that like my wife does supply chain for Burger King, and so they've been working remote for the last year and a half, and like every month we'll get some random box with like some Popeyes branded sneakers or a Tim Hortons branded apron, or and things like that, because the company's trying harder on that front to like maintain culture and stuff like that. And so you guys end up becoming like the fabric, or helping with the fabric of a company culture, the more remote they are. And more distributed there. Because like if they'd all been in the office, they could have just had one point of delivery and said like collect your stuff at the front desk type of thing, but sending 500 people 500 distinct pairs of shoes. Although in their case, I think they've kind of dropped the ball and everyone got size 11 Converse, which does not really help for anybody,
or anyone.
right? But still, maybe they have ways to go. Maybe they need to talk to you guys, So
But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, there was a huge accelerant. The first few months of the pandemic were kind of nerve-wracking a bit. It's not, it wasn't like, oh, all of a sudden March 15th or something when people, like that first Monday after, lockdowns and everything, people are like, oh, let's buy a bunch of swag. It was like, no, let's figure out what the future looks like. Are we even going to be in business? Or do we have to fire people? Like, not even just us, like other companies were like, these are the things they're thinking about for those first months. So we were like, okay, is swag like that important to these companies right now? Is it going to be top of mind? Where the budget's going to be? And what was good was at the beginning of that year of last year, I was also on kind of this crusade to try to figure out, the data behind our business that could forecast future revenue. Because in a transactional business, you start at $0 every month, You don't have recurring revenue where it's like, oh, every month we're just growing on top of that subscription revenue. It's like, no, you start at 0. And, with that, when you're bootstrapped and you start at 0 every month and there's a pandemic, you're like, shit, like, are we going to make it through it? So anyway, I was starting to figure out, okay, if I can look at pipeline data, leads, traffic, goal value in Google Analytics, we can start to forecast what future revenue is going to be. And I just wanted to like kind of play around, like, is there correlation here? And we started to build these models that were super accurate when it came to forecasting future revenue by looking at like these leading indicators. So in March and April, when things are kind of unclear, yeah, we cut expenses a little bit just to make sure we were safe. But at the same time, we had these leading indicators that were like, no, May and June are actually setting up to be like the best months of all time. So we ended up like doubling down. We built a lot of content out. Helen took the forefront of building a lot of content out around these new use cases. We started to build ad campaigns around them. We never dropped marketing. We increased marketing. We didn't fire anybody, especially when it came to sales type positions. So we had that kind of confidence in the data to double down. And then June, July, August, they just started. We were doubling. Like there was months where we doubled month over month. It was just crazy times. And you talked about like Burger King. Like we had companies like Duolingo that did stuff very similar, and they wrote a whole blog post about it where every month, and they continue doing this, there's different thematic packages going out to the different team members to engage them and bring them all together around a common theme and common core, and share pictures and videos and stories in their Slack groups, and just bring the teams together. And there's also, we did a lot of work with universities, with graduating classes and new students, virtual events. There's just been so many opportunities. And to Helen's point, it's became like this on-ramp for these companies to realize like, wow, there's a solution out there that can manage this process from end to end in the cloud, and we don't have to touch it. And wow, like what are some of the other ways that we could be leveraging Swag to engage, customers or partners? And, it's a $30 billion market at the top. I think it's like a $50 to $60 billion market with us because of how much friction we eliminate and how much, it inspires people to utilize physical items in the same way that they would like digital campaigns or digital gifts or something.
So I want to unpack a little bit what you casually mentioned that you're bootstrapped. And I think this is a really interesting topic because we've kind of started seeing this debate definitely on like tech Twitter a little bit, definitely on, like in the investment community on whether a founder should be raising money, right? Like that's kind of like a debate. Like some people believe that the only way to grow a very, very large successful company is to put yourself in the most leveraged position and kind of execute against that. And some people think like, sure, but you could also, build a business and like make money by selling things, right? Like, and I think there's like those two ends of the spectrum. You've made a conscious decision to not raise venture capital. Is that right, Michael?
I think it's more of a natural progression of that wasn't ever really the goal to set out and do that. As you heard us kind of talking about the evolution of the business and how it started, it was very kind of like, let's test this, let's see if there's something there, let's evolve it. So it was this constant kind of snowballing and evolution off of like an initial insight. There was never like a specific moment where it's like, aha, we've architected the blueprint of what this business is going to be for the next 10 years and this venture backable model. It was only over the last like year and a half where it became very clear like what the 5 to 7 year kind of vision is for the business. And in that moment, you finally have like a model that's like, okay, if you put capital into this, it's pretty predictable like what the outcome is going to be, or you're going to compress the time it takes to get there. The first 2-3 years were just very experimental. And I didn't want to raise venture capital. Yeah. So that was definitely in the back of my mind. Like I wanted to do it without it. But I think there's too much like raising money to figure out the business, like too many people raise too quickly and too early when they haven't gotten to like product market fit, or they don't have a clear sense of like what the vision for the future looks like. So they end up just burning investor capital, figuring that stuff out. And then they have to raise again. And they also, that's the most risky time for an investor. You don't have it figured out. It's not clear that putting money in at A leads to the B outcome. So you're raising at pretty unfavorable terms. You're giving up big chunks of your business. The standard like seed round is like giving up 25% of your company. Well, that's a huge hit, if you can get past that initial seed round without having to raise, you can save yourself tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in the future if you have a good outcome. So if you're really bought into like, hey, long term, we're going to build something big here, then anything you can do to get past that initial risk phase to avoid raising money is going to have a huge impact on the long term. Now there's a certain point in the future where it's very clear that capital is the constraint in the business, and the model works very well. And especially now that equity capital is so much cheaper than it used to be. You can raise at probably double or 3x the valuation that you might have 2 to 3 years ago. It becomes more appealing for sure. And there's I'm not totally writing it off the table that we wouldn't tap into it, but we didn't have it. It wasn't like this master plan, like raise money, build this huge business. It was very iterative, and luckily for us, we've gotten through all the risky parts, and now we have so much optionality to go down different paths or work with only investors we would want to work with, or not raise, or whatever.
Helen, do you think the state of, some founders are raising millions of dollars, like not even pre-revenue, like pre-product, as Michael alluded to, and all that. Do you think the state of that makes entrepreneurs a little lazy because they don't have that like feet to the fire, like I'm staying up at night to figure this out mentality, or is that the wrong way of thinking about it?
I think it's a lot of pressure just running a business. I actually think it's more challenging if you don't have the product market fit and you have investors, because now you have no say, or very little say, or limited say, like in how you want to actually make decisions. And that was really something that for us, when we were like in the very infancy of the company, we didn't know which direction we wanted to take it. And from my experience with startups, I was very against bringing in VCs, because I knew, I'm like, everything we're dreaming about building, they can just come in and say, no, like you're going to do it this way now. And then you can build it, and then they can still say no. And there's a whole other level of pressure that when you have VCs, I don't think that there's like, it eliminates it at all, because it's just a different type of pressure. But you do kind of remove that flexibility to kind of shift gears how you want as a founder, and be able to double down and make decisions without having, opinions by committee of like, I have to get approval for this one tech release, or I have to get approval for hiring these people, or I need to asked for more money. It's just a different, a completely different way of growing the business. But, I agree with Michael that I do think there are points where you should raise, and there are points where you probably shouldn't. And I do see a lot of people raising probably too early and thinking that that's the only way to get started. Like, I have an idea, and they get so down about it. Like, I wasn't able to raise capital. Like, I'm done. I can't do anything. And like, you can, like, you can still get started and at least get kind of some of the groundwork, working to be able to figure it out. But I think it just depends also what the person wants to do.
And I think that the leeway that you have with investors is very predicated on how good you're executing, like how well you're executing. If you have your shit together, company's growing, 10% a month or whatever, your customers are happy, the investors are just going to sit back. Like at the end of the day, VCs are pretty lazy. They have lots of companies. If they wanted to work really hard, they'd run a company. They're not. So they don't want to have to get involved in the day-to-day of the business. So as long as you're executing well, then they'll leave you alone. It becomes an issue when you don't have your shit together, and then they want to push you into a certain business model or do this decision, or we're going to bring in an executive who's an adult who's going to lead the business. So those are the things you got to watch out for. But I think the other thing that is in this environment you were talking about, startups that can raise, look at all the Y Combinator companies, they can raise at 20, 30, $40 million valuation without even a product on day one. That has huge implications for those founders. It takes a lot of options off the table. A $50 million exit is not acceptable. A $100 million exit is probably not acceptable. Even maybe $500 million is kind of like, oh, well, you did okay. But those can have huge, changes to people's lives. If we were to sell the business today for 300 or 400 million, a VC wouldn't really bat an eye about that, but we'd be set for the rest of our lives. That's a huge outcome for us personally as the leadership team. But that you eliminate those options for you when you raise that early, and it forces you to be very aggressive about like the business model and the approach and how quickly you want to scale. And when you force yourself to scale at a certain pace, it increases the likelihood of failure of the company 100%. And that's what you're signing up for.
All right, let's switch gears to running a company as a couple, right? I know that there are some people that have all these hot takes and really strong feelings about this, about how it's just going to put a huge strain on the relationship because you're mixing business and relationships. And there's some people who are like, I couldn't imagine running a company without someone that I could be 100% transparent to, zero filter and all that. How has it been? Give us the no bullshit. Is it, we want under the hood on how this journey has been for the two of you.
I'll let Helen go. I'm interested to hear her. What's that game, Newlyweds or something, where they say one answer and you gotta say if you had the same answer?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it has its challenges, for sure. But I think that, Michael and I are just so passionate about the company. And a lot of people that are on our team don't even know we're a couple, until they see Michael walking back in the background. They're like, what's Michael doing at your apartment? And I'm like, I guess no one told you. So, I mean, it has its challenges. I mean, I think for me, it has a little bit more challenges being a female and I'm Michael's girlfriend and I didn't exactly found the company. I came in at year one of being in the company. So for me, I felt like I had to work really hard to gain people on the team's approval or really gain their respect, because it is a challenging dynamic when you have couples, and it does kind of change things because they don't, there are times where maybe they don't feel like they can be as transparent with you because they're like, well, she's with Michael and Michael's the founder. And, if I say something to her, she's not going to be happy or she'll tell him. So those are the things that I think make it challenging or harder when you're running a business. But I think we've done a pretty good job of letting our team kind of be very open and honest. And we're very open and honest with our teams. But for me, that's been the biggest challenge, is not so much between me and Michael getting along at work, because we don't ever really go at it at work or anything like that. But I think the more challenging part is just how does the team interpret that, and how do they, how comfortable do they feel with having couples that own the company.
Yeah, I think Helen starts at a step or two below in an unfortunate way, where one, she's got to, women in general within business have to prove themselves a little bit more, I think. And then, women that's also, the girlfriend of the founder, the initial thought is, oh, she's just here, because she's with him, or she's just, he needed to give her something to do, or blah, blah, blah. If you don't know the backstory, you don't know anything about Helen, that's what a lot of like America thinks like right away. So obviously we try to hire super smart intellectual people that can think beyond the surface level, and we don't, it's not as big of a deal. But also you deal with outsiders and partners, and they have different perceptions. So I definitely see how that impacts her. But when it comes to how we work together, I'm kind of like oddly robotic in a way where I'm like, my emotional sake is very weird, but I can compartmentalize like what I do in work and what I do in like my personal life very well. I think, like we can have a meeting that Helen and I are on from like 4:30 to 6 with a bunch of the leadership team. And I might be grilling Helen on like, questions about what she's like what she's working on, why it hasn't been done, this, that. But then we'll just, the Zoom call will end, and then we'll just go to dinner. Like that didn't happen, and it's, like you have to be able to separate those two things because they're different, and you have to stay focused on like, oh, here we're working on this, but that doesn't impact our personal relationship. And I don't think many people can like separate those things that distinctly. And I think the other thing too is just having mutual respect for each other. I think that there are plenty of couples that get into business together where the other one is like clearly the stronger partner, and then the other person's just kind of brought along for the journey. And that's not the case. Like we work on very different things in the business. We're equally impactful across different areas. I try not to like get involved in the stuff that Helen works on, so we can work, and be making progress in different areas, and just let people kind of, own their domain. So you have to have respect for the other person for what they're doing purely out of like meritocracy. And if Helen wasn't the right person for the job, she wouldn't be here, and it has to be grounded in that reality, and not like a pity type thing of, oh, I'm just going to bring you into the business because I like you or something.
That's really interesting. I mean, I've heard also the other challenge a lot of couples have working together is like switching off, and like so it's not a 24/7 all encompassing thing. Because I know in my past starting companies, like I'll be 2 a.m. up thinking about work. I'll like there's no sort of time switch or like compartmentalization, and I can imagine if you're both in it at this, like in that same sort of energy around the company, that it's got to be it's got to be a little bit tough to switch off and say like, we're not talking about work from 9 to 11 p.m. type of thing.
I don't think we've ever made those rules. I know there's couples that have like, don't Slack me after 6, or we don't really have those rules. Like, when Michael started the company, he was living out of my apartment in LA. Like, I saw everything he was building. I was helping along the way in some things, but I wasn't full time. So I saw the like hard work that he was putting on it. And when I joined, I was right there with him, and I was just as equally committed and obsessed with building the business. We would sleep at the office. We would stay there
Well, the
overnight.
office was your apartment, right?
Yeah, but we ended up, when we moved back to New Jersey, we had an air mattress at our warehouse that we would stay all night and then work, sleep, wake up, do the same thing all over again.
Elon Musk style.
Yeah, but with couples edition. But yeah, so it was, everything we did, we were always kind of on the same page of, of growth and passion. I don't think there was ever like a moment where we're kind of not on the same wavelength in that respect. But I also think just in general, whether you're a couple or not, if you don't have people on your leadership team that you can just scream at and then say, hey, let's grab a bite to eat after, then there's something wrong. Because I think that all of us kind of have that on our team, where we'll get into these meetings and we're whiteboarding and having really strong opinions about stuff, and then we get off and we're like, all right, like, cool, let's go eat, let's go, that was fun. Like, it's not even, you don't even like think anything of it.
And I think people are so quick to like want to put life and work in different baskets and stuff. And like, yeah, we compartmentalize like our relationships and that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, like really successful people, they're thinking about their career and work and their business 24/7. Everything that they do, whether they're reading a book or they're on Twitter or they're observing things in the real world, it's always being tied back to like their business and their career and what they're doing. And you never get to a point where like, oh, at this point, it's like over. You just stop thinking. Like, it's 8 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
life just stops. It's just and if
Yeah.
you're not like that with the other person, if Helen wasn't like that, it just wouldn't work. That's just not the case. Like we talk about business and the company on Saturday at 3 o'clock while we're running because we just really love it. If you don't love it, then it's not going to work. But you can't try to combat the natural tendency to just care about your business and love entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, some couples love to ride bikes together. We like to build businesses. Like that's just happens to be what we're really passionate about. So I don't think I could be with Michael if he wasn't the way that he is, and I don't think it would work vice versa either.
That's awesome to hear, and we'll circle back with you guys in a year once you guys have hit 500 million a year in revenue as a couple or as a company / couple. But so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you guys about like what's your experience been like in Miami, since this is a MiamiTech pod, right? So are there things that have been surprising to you guys since you moved 6 months or a year ago at this point?
I'll let Michael take that first because he's a newbie to Miami.
Yeah. Well, we came here September of last year, so it's been basically a year at this point. But we've been coming back and forth for 3.5 years probably, because Helen and I have been around together for 4.5 years. We were in California for a year, then we came back to the East Coast. So it's been 3.5 years on the East Coast, and we spent that, I would say 80% of the time in New Jersey and like 20 or 10 to 20% of the time in Fort Lauderdale for the most part. And we had an office in Fort Lauderdale for a year and a half because our CTO that Helen had worked with at a prior company joined from South Florida. He brought in 2 more engineers from Miami. We had a product designer down here in Miami. So we had a connection to this area a bit, but it was never, I never really considered it a viable place for me to stay full time because, the perception of South Florida from a New Yorker's perspective is, it's the place to have fun. It's the place to vacation. It's the place to retire. All the really competent, interesting people go somewhere else and then they come back later or they don't come back. Like that's always been kind of the rub with South Florida. But when I came down here in September, the lifestyle just way better. New York and New Jersey, there's very limited things that you can do, to be honest. If you live in New York City, you're very, very just focused on your career and there's nothing really else going on. It's like, work all day and then go to like a nightclub at midnight or something or some dinner, restaurant and do it over again. And everyone's so like, harsh and kind of like it's very tough life. But in Miami, people are just like way happier. They're more active, they're healthier, there's better food, all this kind of stuff that leads to a better lifestyle, which makes you work better. The outcomes like in your day to day, I think, are higher quality when you're happier at your core. And then around December and January, when the mayor started his tech crusade, it started to turn into actually a viable option if you wanted to like have a strong career, because it's sort of there was already people, there's you guys, you had like Austin, Bunsen, you had the companies that Helen was at in the past, all that kind of stuff. There was infrastructure. You had Chewy, you had Magic Leap, there was stuff here. But it wasn't until kind of like this external credibility, capital started to come in, investors started to come in. A lot of my friends from New York moved here, friends from California moved here. It became like, wow, like this actually feels more like home to me. And it feels like a place that I can just go and have lunch and I'm going to meet really interesting people. And, so I think it's been surprising of how quickly that's happened. I think even for people like Keith Raboy and the mayor, I think they're shocked at how quickly the Miami tech scene has become a legitimate space. So I think that's been the most surprising. It's like, how this happened so quickly? How many people are supporting it? How quickly new entrants are coming in? I just saw the post that you had put about how much capital had come in the last few weeks, and then 3x like migrants incoming into Miami, and the home, how many new people bought homes in Miami over the last year. So there's just so much momentum here, and it's good to be here early as part of it and help it kind of grow. We started with like 6 people down here when we moved. Now we have about 20 down here. So we want to keep continuing to invest here. We're getting a bigger office in Wynwood that could probably hold 50 to 60 people. So we want to continue to double down and this become our real hub for the company, other than like our warehouse in New Jersey that's just difficult to move. But it's been great.
Michael and Helen, thank you so much for joining us this week on the MiamiTech Pod. It's fascinating to hear your story. We definitely need to do this again. You know, as the company keeps growing, as you guys keep iterating, we also definitely need to hit up the coming Chipotle in Midtown, maybe with Austin, and do a little Midtown check Chipotle Chipotle lunch or something like that. But
I like Chipotle. Helen's Mexican, so she has like some shit on Chipotle.
Let's go to Latin. Can we go to Latin Cafe or something?
All right. We'll figure it out. But thanks, guys. This was really awesome to have you on, and we'll make sure that we figure out the burrito wars later. But this was episode 35 of the MiamiTech Pod, and we'll be back with you next week with a really exciting episode. Take care.